may surprise you. It may surprise you. And that is a diagram showing the typical shape of a scientific paper, or your master's thesis, or your PhD thesis. And you may not have thought about the structure being like that before. So we have an abstract at the top, and then a funnel-shaped introduction, methods, or materials and methods, results, and then a discussion section. We're going to be having, through the course, we're going to be having a look at those sections in quite a lot of detail. But the introduction is interesting. It has a funnel shape because it starts with a very broad focus. It talks about the big picture. It introduces the reader to the background information and findings from other people, from other scientists. And then it focuses down on your study, the objectives of your study, the aims of your study. Most of you will be very much aware of the materials and methods section. Why do we have that? Well, we have that to really show how the results were obtained and that the results are credible, the results are believable, the results are based on good laboratory practice, good field techniques, good equipment, good instruments, good procedures. The results section is critically important because everything in the paper relates to the results. Everything in the paper is connected with the data and with the various analyses that you've done on that data. So the results you should really be thinking about as being the heart of the paper. And then the discussion starts with the breadth of the results and draws the reader out into the wider conclusions that can be drawn from the information that you've presented. The same breadth of discussion that you started with in the introduction. So we have the funnel upside down at the bottom. And we'll talk about how you might do that, and some of the handouts that you've got, which we'll come to later, you will see how to put some structure, some checklists against each of those sections. Now there are variations on that shape. Sometimes we don't just have results, we can have results and discussion. And typically if we have results and discussion, we have some conclusions. We'll still have some conclusions here, but they'll be part of the discussion. There are all sorts of different ways of writing papers, and different journals handle that differently, and you need to be aware of what your journal, or in this university, what the university expects to see in your thesis. In some cases, particularly in the thesis, we might see something like this: a broad introduction, and then a series of experiments, A, B, and C, methods, results, discussion, and then some overall conclusions that draw the information from each of the experiments together. That's probably what you'll have in a thesis, particularly a PhD thesis, where you've followed different lines of investigation. Is that what you thought a scientific paper might look like in a diagrammatic form? Had you ever thought about it before? I'm not sure I had when I started preparing this set of seminars. Do you think that papers are structured in a very different way to that? Certainly review papers are, no question. And in some disciplines, and I need to be careful today because I know we've got people from different disciplines, the structures are sometimes different. But you'll need to deal with that in your own scientific discipline with the journals that you wish to publish in.
In many of the journals, they prefer to have methods at the end of, after the results and discussion. Many of the paper that I saw.
Yes, some journals will place a lot less emphasis on methods and have those to justify the results. I think that takes me back to my comment about engineering being a little different than biology. Some online journals now are managing things quite differently too, where you can access data online that's not published in the printed form. It's hidden behind the paper, if you like, but still accessible. So very good points, because you need to know what the requirements are of the journal that you're publishing in. And in the last session that we deal with this week, we'll be talking a lot about that. All right, let's just try something, get you thinking and interacting. If you saw the words, "It is very likely that something happened because we did something," where would you expect to see that in the scientific paper? Would it be in the introduction, in the materials and methods, or the discussion? It's very likely that something happened because this was observed. Where would we see that in the paper? Did I hear somebody say discussion? We think that's discussion? Yes? Yes, that's discussion. What about something yielded a total of so many units? Where might you expect to see that? Louder voices? Don't be shy. Results? Yes, I think so. The aim of the work described. Introduction? Yes, correct. But where else might you see that? Yes, you might see that in the abstract. Where else? Well, we said introduction, yes, but where else? The conclusion, the discussion, yes. Remember that, because we'll come back to that later. You often repeat in the discussion what you had in the introduction. So you might see the aim of the work described. You're reminding people in the discussion of why you did the work. So yeah, a little bit tricky question, but you would see that in perhaps 3 different places. What about something was used to calculate the standard error or the p-value? Where might you see that? Materials and methods, yes, quite easy. There have been few long-term studies of the effect of something on something. Where might you see that? Introduction, yes. Where else perhaps? Discussion, yeah. Again, not a tricky question, but remember you're introducing something early in the paper and then you pick up those same themes and discuss them later in the paper. This result may be explained by discussion. Yes, absolutely. You're speculating, you're guessing, you're challenging the reader to think about it. Analysis was carried out using materials and methods, or methods, yes. And something was highly correlated with something. Results? Yes? maybe discussion as well, maybe also abstract, because it might be quite an important finding in the paper. So we're already starting to see some things come through from those examples. And what we're seeing in a number of those cases is continuity through the paper, where you introduce something, you build on that, particularly in the results, and then you come back to it in the discussion and in the conclusions. And because the abstract is a mini version of the paper, then you probably will see some of those terms in the abstract as well. All right, questions? Okay, now you've been given a lot of handouts this morning. Keep bringing those to the sessions because we'll use those at different times. But don't try and read them ahead of time. That's not the PowerPoints, it's the other handouts that you've got. Don't try and read them ahead of time, it'll just be too confusing for you. All right, what say we just take 5 minutes break?